I begin this keynote by acknowledging the Boonwurrung people of the Kulin Nation, traditional custodians of the unceded land from which I speak today. I pay my respects to their elders past and present. I extend that respect to Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and First Nation peoples from around the world here today. It was Ursula Le Guin who wrote, "We've heard it. We've all heard all about all the sticks and spears and swords, the things to bash and poke and hit with, the long, hard things. But we have not heard about the thing to put things in, the container for the thing contained. That is a new story. That is news." A film can be a spear or a container, or both. And so can a keynote address. I'm choosing the container mode. There are various things in this keynote container. I will share with you what I'm currently thinking about, tentative ideas that have been forming as I create this talk. Some of my academic film work, the work of other filmmakers, theorists, and even some journalists. I began my PhD for a number of different reasons. Firstly, I feared a time when I couldn't lug the equipment around. My back was already showing signs of years of abuse. I needed to migrate into a different and related industry. Academia seemed like a good choice. Secondly, I was sick of being poor and the precarity of constantly worrying about how to pay bills and working in an industry that provides no certainty of income. Thirdly, I had filmed footage of an Indonesian woman in Indonesia speaking Indonesian, and I was certain that I would not be able to interest an Australian broadcaster in that documentary. So I thought I would get a scholarship and make it as part of a creative practice PhD. My mates were using scholarships and PhDs as a way to make projects, so I thought, well, I'll follow suit. In my top reasons for studying a PhD, discovering new knowledge didn't even make the list. To be honest, I was a bit worried about getting bored spending 3.5 years exploring one idea. I had no understanding about the process and nature of research. I thought I had to find out answers, as if there is a right and a wrong answer to all things that could be uncovered through investigation. Eventually, I began to realize that how I research, and this is not how everyone researches, but how I research, is to find out questions that disrupt and interrogate what I take for granted. That's pretty much what I was doing as a documentary filmmaker. I didn't realize that I could keep doing that in the academy. The most exciting discovery for me was that such a thing as creative practice research existed. I had thought that I would have to put my creative self in a bag off to the side, and I was worried about the effect that would have on me. Because, let's be frank, people only become documentary filmmakers because they absolutely feel a need to do it. Could that even be put in a bag off to the side? Two of my supervisors, Craig Batty and Marsha Berry, write about the creative practice PhD. They say, "It is a space of constellations and connections where practices, methods, and understandings meet and shape new methodologies, an environment that serves as a vital incubator for risk-taking, reflexivity, and fearless critical thinking." Amazing. I did not have to negate nor deny my previous identity as a filmmaker. Instead, I could use it. For me, my creative self is the starting point for and the ending point of my research. They are entwined, and the experience of the PhD was transformative. There is no doubt about that. As I developed as a researcher, I shifted away from the idea of creating a broadcast documentary towards making short films that explore my research questions. For the first time in my life, I did not need to make my income from my films, and so the type of films I could create completely changed. I didn't stop being a filmmaker, but the research journey has affected the films I now create. The desire to find the disrupting questions has stayed with me, and it helps me to continue transforming who I am and what I think. It's time to show you who I am as a researcher, and the best way to do that is to play an excerpt of my latest digital paper, which contains some of the questions I'm currently thinking about. There is always new knowledge, meaning knowledge that is new to me, for me to discover, or should I say, become aware of. All that remains of this sculpture are two hands in a gesture of friendship. It's possible that it's Nefertiti and her partner. It's not certain. What I see is a haptic representation of collaboration. It could represent the fragments of a researcher and a participant as they work together on a human research project. Decolonizing scholar Linda Tuiwai-Smith explains that research is not an innocent or distant academic exercise. There is always something at stake, and it occurs in a set of political and social conditions. Who we are, when we are, where we are, and what we do all inform how we know our world. The researcher has a relationship with their own identity, with the research, with their time, and the people involved in the research. They even have a relationship with the equipment they work with in documenting that research. All these relationships bring with them underlying moral values, which can be seen as being situational. Some of these underlying morals can conflict, and a tension arises when industry-led ways of knowing conflict with academic ways of knowing. Given that the situated nature of the researcher matters, I will reveal my own identity. I brought to academia a set of industry ethical values that I naively felt were solid and complete. Postgraduate study opened my eyes to the dire ethical situation for the workers in my industry and in most of the creative industries. As a documentarian, my ethical focus was only on those on the other side of my lens, and I adhered to that adage of do no harm. And yet, I expected myself and my production team to suck it up and do what it takes to get the shot, no matter the risk or the harm. This is normalized behavior that we all perpetrated and expected of each other. Sue Joseph explored how moral codes can differ depending upon the profession being practiced. Joseph points out that while most university ethics processes are about minimizing harm to the individual, that it is often the remit of the investigative journalists to cause harm in the public interest. In the MEAA Journalist Code of Ethics, which is used in Australia, public interest or public harm overrides all other ethical or harm concerns. The greatest good for the greatest number of people overrides individual harm. Imagine if we said journalists should not have reported on pedophile priests because of the harm it might cause to the individual pedophile priests, and that the priests had not consented to be reported on. So that is an example of the type of research film I make. Often they are about my filmmaking, but you can see that my research is starting to question the fundamentals of the academic process, as well as the filmmaking process. As I said earlier, it's all becoming entangled. Alongside the essay films, I also make experimental films. What is playing now is the result of a collaboration between myself, this sand dune, and composer Gail Priest. It emerges from my interest in posthumanism. As philosopher Rosie Braidotti points out, posthuman subjects are a work in progress. They interrogate the self-representations and the conventional understandings of being human, which we have inherited from the past. This is an apt description of the process I underwent when studying the PhD. Who I was helped to create who I am as a researcher. So I want to move on from my PhD story to questions I am asking about the nature of research. The UK Research and Innovation website says about what we do as researchers. Arts and humanities research is invested in discovering new ways of understanding human culture. It's the type of motherhood statement that you will find on most Research Council websites around the world that are concerned with arts and humanities. I want to pick out two words in that sentence: discovering and new. In postgraduate study, we talk about discovering and generating new knowledge. Where's the gap in the knowledge? What's your new knowledge? Let's face it, you've had this conversation with your supervisor, who's declared it's your aim to generate new knowledge, to discover it. That sounds noble. It sounds exciting. I admit it wasn't why I started my PhD. I was a bit more mercenary, but it was what I enjoyed about doing the PhD, the wonder of it all. I want to apply a decolonizing lens to these words. What if we used discovery and new in another sentence? For instance, Christopher Columbus discovered the new lands known as the Americas. Captain Cook discovered the new lands known as Australia. If we look at the word discovery in this context, it becomes clear that discovering means becoming aware of something that was already known. And this leads to the question, does new only mean new to the discoverer and their cohort? I'm not sure if you noticed, but this is how I use the words discovery and new in my introduction. I discovered things that are already known but new to me. If we listen to the decolonizing critique, are researchers in fact people who extract knowledge, extracting it from those that we study or from nature? Or to be a bit more generous, are we people who transfer knowledge from one place to another? Or even, for creative practice researchers, people who notice and interrogate known knowledge? In my own practice, that is what I feel I do as a creative practice researcher. I notice and interrogate what I am doing as a filmmaker. I don't discover new knowledge. I put into words and images knowledge that was always known and felt, but not necessarily articulated. I like to think that through the noticing, I develop a greater understanding of my own choices as a filmmaker. To give you an example, I cut a documentary for broadcast on Australian TV. The one I went into the PhD to make, but as it turned out I didn't. I got distracted by all the new knowledge. So I cut a film version after the PhD. The broadcaster wanted me to remove the diurnal structure that I used in the initial cut. Diurnal meaning a day in the life of. I knew I was going to have to do this. I knew that broadcasters hate diurnal structures for documentaries, but what I didn't understand was why they hate them and why I was so resistant about removing that structure. The diurnal structure is as much an artifice as any other. The scenes did not, in fact, take place on one day. They took place over a couple of years. So why did I feel so unhappy about removing it as an organising force for the documentary? I want to show you a short essay film I created about what I noticed about this. None of my knowledge in the essay film is new or discovered. It discusses something that inside me I intuitively already knew and felt but didn't know how to articulate. I also want to be clear here that my translation of feelings into words doesn't make the feelings lesser and the words powerful. Linda Tui-Y-Smith says, research is an important part of the colonisation process because it is concerned with defining legitimate knowledge. The intuitive process of a filmmaker is a legitimate form of knowledge emerging from years of experience in constructing things. My desire to interrogate my feelings is a legitimate form of knowledge formed from learning to deconstruct things. The knowledge we share in the academy has rigour, but so too does the experiential knowledge of the filmmaker. I find these different epistemologies, that of the practitioner and that of the academic, useful in different situations. But I digress. Back to the story about the diurnal structure, a story that academic epistemologies helped me to understand. Ursula Le Guin talks about the hero narrative as the story that hid my humanity from me, where the central concern of narrative is conflict, the killer story. What if, instead of conflict, the story focuses on what Donna Haraway styles as relentlessly becoming with? Rather than describing interspecies relationships, this becomes a narrative mode. I wanted to create a documentary in which there was no one thing that was at stake, and yet many things are always at stake, in which what is being explored is being a human in our world. Here is the first minute of that cut of the documentary.
Oh, piye iki juragane buah iki? Piye, Mbak?
Ya.
Hai. Kok cilik-cilik iki? Gede-gede kae.
Iki malah ra ono temblonge, Mbak.
Oh.
Nek nggo ke kula mladon ngene.
Ya wis. Lah yang apik-apik. Ah iya iso
Empuk, Mbak.
ngomong. Heh?
Ngene sik empuk.
Heeh, empuk. Sekilo wae.
Kula mandi, Bu.
Ora mambu.
Kula mandi di syuting.
But the broadcaster wanted a different story. They wanted something to be at stake and for Bekti to overcome challenges to bring about change.
But without any deliberate and thorough thinking about the philosophy, about the purpose and etc. So
The broadcaster's note said it took too long for Bekti to get to work, at 4 minutes in a 26-minute documentary. In their eyes, work is the battleground for the narrative. Home is a place to provide lovely insights into Bekti's character. But what the character does is at work, not at home. Here is the first minute of what I created for the broadcaster.
My name is Bekti Andari. I have a great job at a university in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. I explain science to the communities and explain the communities to the scientists.
from the perspective of community, it could be too far.
Bekti is not a scientist. She's a communicator. She works with an international team who are trying to eliminate mosquito-borne diseases like dengue. The scientists have found that mosquitoes infected with a common bacteria called Wolbachia are less likely to carry dengue. Around 25,000 people die each year from dengue infections, so it's important work. These scientists realise that eliminating dengue is as much about understanding social behaviour as it is about what happens in the lab.
Now, there are many differences in these cuts. What I want to focus on is the value boundary implicit in preferencing Bekti's work as being the site of action and how this diminishes her domestic self in the narrative. So, why did the broadcaster feel that the workspace is the world of action? I think it is because it corresponds to what we value more generally in society.
Siap ya.
For instance, economic theorists construct production boundaries that define what they think creates value. What is inside or outside changes over time.
Pantang.
As Mariana Mazzucato points out, until the feminists challenged this in the late 20th century, the domestic sphere was always placed outside what creates value. Imagine a system where your cooking, cleaning, or looking after your children is not considered productive. The broadcaster's notes aligned an ideal of heroicism with neoliberal values of the individual productive worker, where the domestic sphere of the main character is outside the action boundary.
Yo mandi.
As the narrative shifted from a feminist relentlessly becoming with to a populist one using conflict, the home environment reduced in importance. Through this process, I could clearly see that a feminist narrative structure can challenge neoliberal values that the self is primarily defined by actions at work.
Jadi kebetulan saja gitu.
Creative industry scholar Mark Banks points out that contrary to popular belief, the creative economy does not so much challenge social inequalities as structurally reinforce them. And I have just played you a prime example. If I wanted the documentary to be broadcast, I had to structurally reinforce hegemonic positions by creating a neoliberal hero out of Bekti and by reducing the importance of her domestic self. Academics have asked me why I did this, especially once I understood what I was doing. Interestingly, filmmakers never ask me this. They already know the answer. And the answer is found in a combination of power and obligation. I felt an obligation to Bekti, that the time she spent letting me film her amount to something worthwhile. As a broadcast documentary filmmaker, worthwhile means a documentary broadcast. I also felt powerless to force the broadcaster to accept a structure that went against the hero narrative and neoliberal agenda. I work in an industry where Van Rout, Wallace and Bacalski note that production companies are rarely in a position to turn down commissions. So I was always going to comply with the required broadcaster norms and only tinker at the edges of those rather than reject the centre. So what if we want to challenge the norms rather than tinker at the edges? And is this even possible? I love the term activist academic, but maybe that is more about making me feel worthy than me bringing about change. And this is where I want to take you in what I think will be an unexpected direction. Linda Tuiwai-Smith says about knowledge that it has beauty and can make the world beautiful if used in a good way. Can we challenge norms with beautiful knowledge? Is there such a thing as a good way? I intuitively feel that this beauty is not the kind that is equated with pretty or nice. It is the kind of beauty that is equated with insight and awe. Notice how I still use my filmmaker epistemology of intuitive knowledge as a starting point even for academic inquiry. As for being used in a good way, I don't have an intuitive answer for that. So I want to first tease out what beauty might be, and maybe ideas of good will follow. Being a filmmaker, I'm going to turn to other filmmakers to help me understand beauty. When French filmmaker Agnes Varda was asked about what her films offer people, she said, I would say energy, I would say love for filming, intuition. I mean, a woman working with her intuition and trying to be intelligent. It's like a stream of feelings, intuition and joy of discovering things, finding beauty where maybe it's not, seeing, and on the other hand, trying to be structured, organized. Interestingly, the notion of beauty is entwined with an intelligent intuitiveness. So let's turn to another documentarian. Chris Hedges was asked about what distinguishes her work from the work of others. She said, "I think to a great extent people have been filmed in a way that makes them look more helpless or more ugly or more disenfranchised than they actually are. So I feel that searching for the humanity is also searching for the beauty, and that is part of what I try to do." If I take lead from Vada and Hedges, the definitions are finding beauty where it's maybe not, and searching for the humanity is also searching for the beauty. Both definitions of beauty are about interrogating or noticing or articulating something that is already there. I think these expressions of beauty open up an interesting dialogue about its nature and how we can create it in knowledge. But once you open the door to knowledge having the capacity to be beautiful, it seems as if beauty is a half-opened door, and that there may be something more if we open it further. I'll call on another filmmaker to help us pry open that door. Sari Braithwaite made a documentary called Because We Have Each Other. This is a film that could have so easily have been about the victims in our society, the type of documentary that Hedges says she doesn't make. Instead, the film is a celebration of how a family with multiple members who are neurodiverse live their day-to-day life. We can see that the family live at the margins of the city, are not financially wealthy, and that being neurodiverse is a complicated life. But as the family explains, they are rich in other ways. We can notice as viewers that they are at the margins of society. But we can also see the beauty of how they are at the centre of their lives, and that this centre is a loving and tolerant space. They are neither victims nor superheroes, they just are. They have good days and bad days, dreams and fears. I'm going to play the trailer for this work, which, being a trailer, has a more heightened emotion than the film itself.
I need a holiday desperately.
We do. We need a holiday.
No, not we. I need a holiday. I didn't say you were invited. My name's Janet Barnes. I'm a 58-year-old mum. I like to think of myself as a positive person. Oh, that's cruel.
I'm Brent. I'm a 52-year-old motorcycle spray painting nut.
Meeting Brent was the push for me that I thought I can trust myself to love somebody else.
I don't know how it works, it just does. She pulls me into line and I bend her out of line. Living with 5 kids with different needs, it's very hard to switch off.
I think I want a break. And I love him, but, you know, I want to love myself.
We are normal people going through shit. We got enough money to survive this week. Am I poor? No. I've got a roof over my head. I've got a lovely wife. I got lovely kids. Never grow up. I just see all we've got. Are you poor? You gotta think, what is poor to you?
Beauty becomes something that we can seek and find in places that may not seem beautiful at first glance. This beauty is a process of filmmaking, a relational quality, a perspective. This type of beauty isn't about ignoring the horror and the experience of oppression. It's a way of honouring us, the humans, who live in the mess that is life. I think that the Barnes-Sharrock families in this film have taken us a step further beyond beauty and into love. So I want to talk about love as a filmmaking process. I have noticed that many of us as documentary filmmakers are interested in sharing the beauty and that love that we develop for what we have filmed. Think back to what Agnes Varda said. I recently filmed this shot of an interior of a room in the ugliest building in a small town called Clunes. I find that I don't fall in love with what I film as I film it, but I do fall in love with it when I watch the footage back. I look at this shot and I am in love with this space, a space I disliked when I was in it. The old honour boards from another time on the aggressive brick wall with straight lines everywhere that drive me nuts when I am framing. The uncomfortable chairs that were donated by a former senior citizen, askew, as in anticipation of ideas being shared. The harsh light filtering into the space across the bricks, the institutional fire signs and apparatus in no way discreet in their placement. The room itself is not a great room, but I love this shot of it, and I think there is beauty in it. I haven't created that beauty. All I've done is find it beautiful through the act of falling in love with it. I don't fall in love with all of the shots that I film, only with some of them, and that is a way of guiding me towards the story and how to tell it. Shanok Sen, director of All That Breathes, said in an interview, "Every time someone comes and says they love the film, it's meaningful irrespective of how repetitious it could play. It's not a diminishing graph at all." Sen will talk about his film as being an exploration of the air or of the human and non-human captured within the same frame, but the way we communicate these ideas involves love and a sharing of a sense of love. Sen says about the brothers who are the key human characters in his film, "When I met them, it enchanted the sky and the birds for me, and I hope it does the same for the audience." Love isn't created by us as filmmakers. We notice it and then we share it. It is known knowledge. During the early days of the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the organisers of this conference, Agata Lulkowska, wrote an article entitled "A Love Letter to Cinema and How Films Help Us Get Through Difficult Times." Love is a word we use to express relationships to film. So this love that I and these other filmmakers speak of is not the romantic love that Bell Hooks critiques as being used by patriarchal culture, that makes one unaware, renders one powerless and out of control. It's not the love that is filled with violence, especially domestic violence, or the love that is linked to notions of possession, to paradigms of domination and submission. Instead, it is rooted in recognition and acceptance that love combines acknowledgement, care, responsibility, commitment, and knowledge. We understand there can be no love without justice. This type of love is connected to our ethical underpinnings as researchers. Bell Hooks goes on to point out how creating a discourse on love is important because without it, she feels that the feminist movement allowed patriarchal mass media to represent the entire movement as a politic grounded in hatred rather than love. This raises the question, could hegemony be challenged by a discourse using love? To explore this, I want to bring in two journalists who took different approaches to the hegemony in the mass media. Vinay Shukla filmed Indian broadcast journalist Ravish Kumar for the film While We Watched. The film is about the rise of nationalism linked to religion in India and how the media promotes hatred between Muslims and Hindus, Pakistanis and Indians. Here is the trailer for it.
आज जो चैनलों में हो रहा है वो पत्रकारिता नहीं है। सबका कंटेंट एक सा होता जा रहा है।
इतना बड़ा खबर हो गया, आप देख लीजिए कहीं चला रहे हो तो।
हिंदुस्तान के खिलाफ बातें करता है, घर में घुसकर मारेंगे तुझे।
जब भी सूचना गायब हो जाएगी तब भाषा में हिंसा ही आएगी।
रवि कुमार, आई वार्न यू, अभी समय है गलत रास्ता छोड़ दो।
एक डरा हुआ पत्रकार लोकतंत्र में अधमरा नागरिक पैदा करता है। नमस्कार, मैं रवीश कुमार।
देश को तोड़ने की बात करते हैं, हम ये बिल्कुल सहन नहीं करेंगे।
न्यूज चैनलों के जरिए जहर आपके बीच खोला जा रहा है। पूछने वाले को देशद्रोही बताया जाता है।
वो फॉलो कर रहा था,
देश से फॉलो कर रहा था। क्या शटडाउन कर देंगे?
पाकिस्तान के गद्दार।
क्या आप मेरे साथ गाना चाहेंगे? सारे जहां से
उस सुअर रवीश कुमार को मैं चेतावनी देता हूँ।
आपको ऐसा हिंदुस्तान चाहिए था?
मुझे छोड़ देना चाहिए।
सर, सरकारें जैसे ही बताएगी वैसे ही खबरें करनी है।
हम भी यही सोच रहे हैं। दुनिया का एक देश बता दीजिए जहां के टीवी पर इतनी नफरत हो। कौन है देशद्रोही यहाँ पर? इस देश में कोई देशद्रोही नहीं है। हम जब भी चुप रहेंगे सत्य से भागते हुए रहेंगे।
The journalist Kumar is trying to fight disinformation and hate speech by using moderation, by interrogating what occurred and the effects of the political climate. He does this in a broadcast space where shock jocks rule the ratings, where being extremist and inciting violence are acceptable and normalised behaviour for commercial TV presenters. Kumar counters the hate and extremism with details of what occurred, with exposés of the effect of the extremism on people's lives, including murder. And that seems like the rational choice, a pathway that as researchers we might use and value, to be the people interrogating the situation and providing a narrative based on the details of the lived experience, to be the voice of moderation. Kumar asks a group of students at a university, "Is this the India you dreamt of?" And they emphatically reply, "No." There is a recognition that they are in a type of hate-filled nightmare and that there is another place, another present that they can dream up. Trinity Minha says about hegemony that it works at levelling our differences and at standardising contexts and expectations in the smallest details of our daily lives. Now, it may seem that Kumar faces a situation where difference is in fact emphasised and reinforced by the hegemony rather than standardised by it. But in reality, anyone who wants to counter that narrative of hatred is silenced, because hatred and accentuating difference as a form of conflict is the hegemonic standardised position. Trin has more to say on this matter. I have often been asked about what some viewers call the lack of conflict in my films. Psychological conflict is often equated with substance and depth. Conflicts in Western contexts often serve to define identities. My response to questions about this lack is let difference replace conflict. One can further say that difference is not what makes conflicts. It is beyond and alongside conflict. We live in a time where hatred and division are hegemonic positions used to reinforce power. At this point, I want to introduce you to another journalist, Stan Grant, who when faced with hatred articulates his position on love. He is a senior ABC broadcaster and journalist who is a Wiradjuri man. That means he's Aboriginal. And he was one of the commentators in Australia for the recent coronation of King Charles. Grant talks about how I was invited to contribute to the ABC's coverage as part of a discussion about the legacy of the monarchy. I pointed out that the Crown represents the invasion and theft of our land. In the name of the Crown, my people were segregated on missions and reserves. Police, wearing the seal of the Crown, took children from their families. Under the Crown, our people were massacred. There was a massive backlash on social media to Grant's commentary. But it wasn't just social media. The right-wing media in Australia singled him out for attack as well. Grant talks about what he said during the coronation as truths, hard truths, truths not told with hate, truths offered with love. Yes, love. I repeatedly said that these truths are spoken with love for the Australia we have never been. After a couple of weeks of the barrage of hatred, Grant resigned on air. This is what Grant said on national television as an exit speech about why he retired. It's complex and interesting, so I'm going to play it in full.
Sometimes we need to just take time out. Sometimes our souls are hurting, and so it is for me. I've had to learn that endurance is not always strength. Sometimes strength is knowing when to say stop. And to those who have sent messages of support, thank you so much. But I'll be okay. Please send that support and care to those of my people and all people who feel abandoned and alone, who are wondering whether they have a place in this country and who don't have my privileges. To those who have abused me and my family, I would just say, if your aim was to hurt me, well, you've succeeded. And I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I must have given you so much cause to hate me so much, to target me and my family, to make threats against me. I'm sorry. And that's what Yinjimarra means. It means that I'm not just responsible for what I do, but for what you do. It's not just a word. It is sacred. It is what it means to be Wiradjuri. It is the core of my being. It is respect. It is respect that comes from the earth we are born into, from God, Bayami. If I break that, I lose who I am. I am down right now, I am. But I'll get back up and you can come at me again and I'll meet you with the love of my people. My people can teach the world to love. As Martin Luther King Jr. said of his struggle, we will wear you down with our capacity to love. Don't mistake our love for weakness. It is our strength. We have never stopped loving and fighting for justice and truth, the hard truths, to speak in our land. Yinjimarra Winangana means to live with respect in a world worth living in. And we in the media must ask if we are truly honouring a world worth living in. Too often, we are the poison in the bloodstream of our society. I fear the media does not have the love or the language to speak to the gentle spirits of our land. I'm not walking away for a while because of racism. We get that far too often. I'm not walking away because of social media hatred. I need a break from the media. I feel like I'm part of the problem. And I need to ask myself how or if we can do it better. To my people, I have always wanted to represent you with pride. I know I might disappoint you sometimes, but in my own little way, I've just wanted to make us seen. And I'm sorry that I can't do that for a little while. To my family, I love you. And to my mum and dad, Bavadu Wiradjuri, Gibi Diramattalinya Baju Wiradjuri, Mandangu. Good night.
Grant is seeking to counter hate with love expressed as hard truths, rather than Kumar's choice of moderation as a way of expressing truths. Both Grant and Kumar are interested in sharing the details in the lived experience, but Grant uses love as a way of imagining a different present that could have been but isn't. I am deeply interested in the idea of a lost present born from injustices, a present that could have been but has not come to pass, and that this can be expressed with love. This brings me to one of my favourite quotations from Rosie Bradotti. In this continuous flow, the present becomes both a memory and a promise. We can see ourselves as existing in the past, the present, and the future. We can know that these hatreds are complex and connected to the way power operates or disempowerment operates. We can see how the internet has turbo-boosted that expression of hatred. Clearly, both Grant and Kumar are interested in dreaming up a different present. Kumar feels a responsibility to counter the hatred with his moderation. Grant feels a responsibility for the hatred. These are slightly different approaches, and I think the slight difference is important to note. Neither Kumar nor Grant have stopped the hatred. It is possible that what Rebecca Solnit calls indirect consequences applies here, and what they have done can be seen as a part of a larger change. Love, in fact, might not be more effective for change than moderation. I suppose I am not concerned with what is most effective, but instead with how Grant's approach differs to what I expect from a journalist, and so becomes radical. I find the idea that we can reimagine the present as we reimagine ourselves powerful, especially since I am a researcher who is a storyteller. I've stated earlier that as creative practice researchers, we are often people who notice and interrogate known knowledge. What I think this discussion on beauty and love has led me towards is the idea that through research, we can reimagine ourselves and our present. We can become responsible for our present. Reimagining the self and the present can be an epistemological container filled with love rather than a spear. We are in a time where using love as an epistemological position is truth-telling, present dreaming, and it is radical. I have taken us on this path through beauty and love, but I don't feel that I have found out what Smith meant by good. I'm not sure I will ever understand what good is. I'm not sure it has a single definition, and I'm okay with that. I'll continue to disrupt and challenge existing norms, and maybe that is a form of good, or at least a form of shared love. So as a final moment, let's return to that motherhood statement from the website. Maybe it could instead read, "Arts and humanities research is a form of love where we listen to and try to reimagine ourselves and human culture." If we had another hour, I would interrogate the words human culture next, but I think that is a talk for another day. Thanks.